when people come up, I'm always curious about who they are, what they do. You know, just I'm nosy, I guess. I have an amazing husband that I married a little over 3 years ago. If any of y'all have ever read Pride and Prejudice or watched the movie, I consider my husband Mr. Darcy, and I will get to the reason why I consider him that later. I have 2 beautiful daughters that I'm very blessed with. Hannah is 4. She is energetic, spunky. That child brings me to my knees a lot to pray. She is a blessing, and I think Hannah will be able to channel her energy one day into something amazing, and so I'm very blessed to have her. I also have another daughter who is 18 months old. Her name is Hadessa Grace Thompson, and she is exactly like her daddy, 100%. Acts like him, talks like him, walks like him, and she is my quieter child, but don't let her fool you. She is very, very smart. When Annette asked me to speak, I was like, okay, I have this sermon that I'm going to do, and I'm going to stick with it. Well, about a month out from today, God was speaking to me in a different area of my life over bondage. And I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm going to speak about bondage. And I had pages and pages of notes. I had been studying and doing word studies, and about a week and a half ago, God said, no, that's not what I'm doing. I'm like, oh, Lord, this is not working. I can't do this. I need to speak about what I know. He said, no, this is what you need to speak about. And he gave me the word grace. And I'm like, okay, Lord, how am I going to tell Annette that I'm a week and a half out and I still do not have a sermon because you keep changing it? Stop. So today I will be talking about grace, and something I need to let you know. I am a high school teacher. I teach technology, and I'm also the ESL coordinator for South Hill ISD. It is easy for me to speak to kids, but for some reason adults, it's harder. I don't know why, but I much prefer to deal with kids. With that being said, I like to tell my kids, I am a lifelong learner. You will ask me questions, and I will not know the answer. But that's okay, because I will find the answer. I will have to learn it, or I will have to ask for help, or you know what? Sometimes I have to tell the kids, well, why don't you teach me? So I want to put that disclaimer out here, and this is what God has directed me as of right now. And you know, He may lead me down a different path later, but this is where I think I'm supposed to be right now. So the word grace. Okay, God. What is grace? So I looked grace up, and grace is defined as unmerited or undeserving favor. Okay, I get that, God. Okay, so when I was looking into the Bible, in the King James Version, does anybody want to guess how many times grace is mentioned? Yes, I don't care. There's no wrong answer. Well, I mean, there is a wrong answer, but that's a good guess, but no. Good try, though. The word grace is mentioned in the Bible 206 times in the King James Version. So I thought to myself, if that word is used 206 times, do we think it's important? Yes, it is. So where I'm going to start off today is I'm going to start off with the story. Like I told you, I have a daughter named Hannah, so I'm going to start with the story of Hannah. The story of Hannah can be found in 1 Samuel 1 and 2. For time's sake, I'm not going to read it, but I do want to do a little study behind Hannah. Let's look at the name meaning. Hannah. Hannah means grace. Well, isn't that convenient? Okay, God, grace, that's what I'm supposed to be talking about. So as I was doing a background study, Hannah is one of 2 wives, and I am not good at pronunciating the names. One of the 2 wives of Elkanah, and the other one, I'm taking a guess, Peninnah, born children, Peninnah. So Hannah and Peninnah were wives to Elkanah. Peninnah was able to have children, but Hannah remained childless. So I found that interesting. So as I was researching, back in the day when Hannah lived, being able to give your husband a child was shame. There was shame, there was pain, and in society belief, they believed if God was unable to give you, or if you weren't unable to have a child, then God was punishing you for a sin that you had done. So as you can imagine, that was in the society she lived in. If you can imagine, well, hey, what am I doing wrong? What did I do? What am I deserving to, unable to have a child? So let's open our Bibles to 1 Samuel 1, and we'll start at verse 4. Okay, whenever Elkanah offered a sacrifice, he always gave portions of the meat to his wife, Peninnah, and to each of her sons and daughters. But he gave a double proportion to Hannah, for he loved her, even though the Lord had kept her from conceiving. The Lord kept her from conceiving. Annette was talking yesterday about the storms and trials that come in our life. A good portion of our storms come from the devil. And then Annette talked about it last night about storms coming because of ourselves, because of our actions, and because of our words. But I wanted to add one more thought, or one more idea. Do y'all realize that sometimes God can bring a storm in our life for a reason? It's not always the devil. We always give the devil credit. But what about God? It says, the Lord had kept her from conceiving. It wasn't the devil who was keeping her from conceiving. It says right here in our Bible, it was God. Yeah. So now, I do want to back up here a little bit. We don't know if Hannah, it's never mentioned, we don't know if from the society belief if Hannah had ever done anything that God prevented her to have a child. We don't know that. It doesn't say it. But we do know that God said, let me repeat it again, He kept her from conceiving. So, we don't know if truly Hannah had done anything that God was punishing her like they believe, or if God was working through her. But I'm coming to this conclusion that is actually God working through her, because as you continue to read, her rival was taunted her severely just to provoke her. I get nervous and I can't talk. Because the Lord had kept Hannah from conceiving. Whenever she went up to the Lord's house, her rival taunted her in this way every year. Hannah wept and would not eat. Okay, Hannah here is being taunted by the second wife, which is known as the rival. And she's upset because the second wife was able to give her husband a child. And here she couldn't, and she's like, okay, what is wrong with me? Why can I not do this? The source of Hannah's pain came from several different sources. It came from the hand of a rival. It came from, to be honest, her husband, because it says here that Elkanah offered a sacrifice. He always gave portions of the meat to his wife, Peninnah, and each of her sons and daughters, but he gave double portions to Hannah. Would that not embarrass you that, your husband's treating you a little bit different because you can't have a child? It's not because she couldn't have a child. It's because he loved her But she didn't see it that way. How many times do we feel like something's being done and it's really not that way? We're just seeing it different. Hannah was in immense pain. She wanted a child. And I want to go back, I'm sorry. Her pain came from multiple sources. We talked about her rival, her husband, and then we talked about the background of society. So society thought she had done something wrong in order not to have a child. And then her pain also came from herself. How many of you know sometimes we are our worst enemies? Yes. I don't know about you, but I can tear myself down in a second. Yeah. Whether it's looking in the mirror and saying, I'm not pretty enough, I need to do this, I need to do better, or I'm just unworthy. That's what Hannah was doing. She was sitting there beating herself up. So not only does she have all these external forces coming at her, but internally, she was doing the same thing to herself. Yes, sure. And then I want to talk about the society. That's how we are today. Do we not let our friends and family tear us down or dictate what we do? Hannah was letting that second wife in society hurt her. And here God is trying to have her go forward, and she can't because she's constantly looking back. How many times do we look back and when we need to be looking forward? Yeah. We can't go forward if we're looking backwards. So I'm going to stop here real quick, and how I relate this to my life is, to be honest, I didn't have the problem getting pregnant. I still don't have a problem getting pregnant. I get pregnant, you say the word, I get pregnant. It's truth. I had my first child from a different man out of wedlock. I was on birth control. I should not have had that child. God blessed me with that child, and God used that child for a purpose in my life. And Hannah is my child who turned my life around and who gave me a purpose and showed me, to be honest, like I said, the child brings me to my knees daily, praying for her salvation, praying for her life, praying to get through situations I have to deal with her. But the thing is, I have lost 5 children. Today I thought I'd be standing before you with a set of twins that I became pregnant with. And my babies would have been here next month. And although the situation is very hurtful, God pulled me through it, and He had a purpose, and He had a plan. Yes, He did. Through the loss of my children, I have come to learn to terms that God has a purpose. And although I don't think it's the devil that always takes away the child, or let me go back and rephrase this. When we found out we were pregnant with twins, I kept it quiet because we knew immediately that something was wrong with one of the children. And so I wanted to wait and make sure, we'd see a good, healthy heartbeat and go on from there. On a Friday, I was supposed to be going out of town to visit a friend from college in Houston, and I noticed I was having complications. It's very common for me in all my pregnancies. I've had complications while carrying, and I knew something was wrong. So instead of going to my friend, I went to the doctor, and that Friday we saw one beautiful, healthy heartbeat, and we had realized that we had lost the other baby and that my body was already taking care of the child to handle that situation. And so the doctor's like, go home, take it easy, and we'll rest. I went home, took it easy, and I remember getting in the shower and praying. And this is the hardest prayer you have to do. Lord, this is not mine. This is yours. Have your will. Lord, if I'm not supposed to have this child, I'm not supposed to have it, and I give it to you. And that's the prayer I've had to pray over each pregnancy, whether they were unplanned or if we planned them. I still had to pray, and I still had to give those children to God, because even though my 2 daughters are here, they are not mine. They are God's. I'm temporarily in charge of them. God has put me in charge to raise those beautiful girls to become women of God. And so I just think of them, and I think, okay, God, if that's your plan, I'll go with it. That Sunday I was admitted, so that was Friday. I had found out we had 1 heartbeat. And by Sunday, I was admitted into the hospital because I was losing a large amount of blood, and they were concerned. At the time, we had not known that I had lost the other baby. So Sunday, we spent the night in the hospital, and by Monday, I was in for surgery. So although I can't relate to Hannah not being able to get pregnant, I can relate to the feeling of loss, or the feeling of not having that child, because like Hannah, I too want another child. I too want a son. I don't know if that's in God's plans. Maybe it's not. But you know what? I'm okay with it if it's not, because if that's what God has for my children, I know I'm going to see my babies one day in heaven. Amen. Because whether what society wants to teach you right now, ladies, is that a life doesn't matter when it's in the womb. It does. They have a heartbeat, they have fingernails, and it's a life. My sister, and I wasn't planning to talk about this, and I hope she's okay with this, but my sister had a daughter named Grace Lee Huddleston. She was born at 22 weeks, 25 weeks. When she went in to find the sex of the baby, she had realized the baby had passed away. That child was born. That child had fingernails. That child had eyelashes. That child had 10 fingers, 10 toes. It was a baby. It was a child. And I don't care what anybody says, it's a child. So let's go to verse 9 in 1 Samuel. Hannah got up after they ate and drank at Shiloh. Eli, the priest, was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's tabernacle, deeply hurt. Hannah is deeply hurt. Hannah prayed to the Lord and wept with many tears, making a vow. She pled, Lord of hosts, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and not forget me, and give your servant a son. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will never be cut. One of my favorite verses. In fact, this is up in my daughter's wall right now, that we had a sign made for her. It says, I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. So Hannah had prayed and said, Lord, if you will do this, I make a vow right here, right now, to give you that child, that son. Okay, I just want this to be noteworthy. Hannah was addressing God respectfully, with faith in his power, and with an attitude of humility. She thought of herself as a servant. And she addresses that in verse 11. She says, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and not forget me, and give your servant a son. She refers to herself as servant twice right there. So I thought that was very noteworthy. And then I came to the conclusion, Hannah's bareness was purposeful. It drove her to God. If there was anything Hannah had learned from this, it was that during our storms, we can go to God. And He is there. He has never left us, and He will never leave us. In verse 18, we go on. May your servant find favor with you, she replied. Then Hannah went on her way. She ate and no longer appears downcast. Hannah walked away after making that vow to God that if He will bless her with a son, she will dedicate him. She walked away in faith. We can't pray for something and not walk by faith. We have to put it in motion. Yes. If we're expecting it, then we act on it. Okay, God, just an example. I needed a new car, I guess back at last December. And we had outgrown my car. I was having issues out of my car. One of the first things I started to do was clean out the garage. Travis is like, why are you cleaning out the garage? I said, I got to make room. He said, make room for what? I said, my new vehicle. He said, babe, we don't have the money. You're not getting a new vehicle. And he goes, what makes you think you're going to get a vehicle that you need more room for? I said, because I need it. I prayed. I'm expecting it. And I'm going to walk by faith. I'm going to do what I know is right until I get that vehicle. Amen. And we had already agreed we weren't getting into debt for it because we have worked so hard to get out of debt. Why we're going to get back into it? So I walked by faith. A week later, I was blessed with a used Tahoe. It allowed me for the first time to go grocery shopping with my girls because we only go grocery shopping once a month. So we like pile it all in there. And then when you have these two kids, you know, when you're in a tiny vehicle, you're riding like this. But it was the first time I was able to go grocery shopping with my kids, fill up the vehicle, and still have room. And I was so excited. But come to that conclusion, you have to walk by faith. And that's what Hannah did. She left walking by faith. She put it into action. Okay, now let's go down to verse 20. After some time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel because she said, I requested him from the Lord. I love the study of names. I love to find out the meaning of them. So, of course, I had to stop and look up Samuel. Samuel, meaning asked or heard of. It is in this verse, chapter 20, that God answers Hannah's prayer. And Hannah starts off first in obedience by naming him Samuel, meaning asked of or heard of God. She was thinking of God when she did that. So if we go on to verse 27. I prayed for this boy, and since the Lord gave me what I asked of him, I now give the boy to the Lord. For as long as he lives, he is given to the Lord. Then he bowed and worshiped the Lord there. So, okay, here's the part that we don't like. How many of y'all made promises to God and we don't follow through? Well, Hannah came before God and said, I want this child, and I will give that child back to you. I'm telling you, the thought of giving my child over to someone right now, not happening. Yeah. That is my baby, and I'm going to stand by that child through thick and thin, and I will protect. And I have a mama bear, and it does come out. It's very ugly. It is very, very ugly, and I have to work to put that thing back in and say, Allie, you know, you got to let this child grow up and be independent. And she's only 4, and I teach her independence, but at the same time, I'm there to teach her, to walk with her, to protect her when she needs it, and to one day relinquish her or to let her go into the world as what God has called her to do. So, as we find out, Hannah keeps her promise. After Samuel was weaned, she presented him to Eli, the priest. I think of that, and I think of how God could send his only son, Jesus Christ, to die on that cross. God had to give his son to die on that cross. Here, Hannah had to give up her son to Eli, the priest. I couldn't do any of those. I would like to stand here honestly and tell you, oh, yes, I could. I would do that in a heartbeat, but I can't. And I'm still learning, and I have to repent daily to give my child back to God. Because I just want to yank her from God and say, nope, this isn't happening. This is my child. But I have to remember, it's not my child. Yes, I carried her. I've clothed her. I fed her. But it is God's child. Amen. And I'm just here to help. What's the outcome of this whole story? Well, if you'll find out later, God blesses Hannah with 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Samuel, her son, would become a prophet of God, a judge, and a leader in the nation of Israel. All because Hannah had to go through a storm. God was gracious to her. She walked by faith, and she had to obey and act upon what she made the vow. And because she did that, God goes on and blesses her with more children. Not just 1, not 2, not 3, but 5 more children. 5 more. This woman couldn't even get pregnant in the beginning. And God also blessed Samuel for it as well. You know, I strongly believe in family bondages. I believe stuff is passed down. And I believe that is an example right there. Because of Hannah's good choices, and she obeyed and walked in faith, God continued to pass on a lineage to her children. Guys, I never saw it until the past couple years. There's bondage in the families. And we think it's, we almost get used to it and think it's acceptable. And it's not. No. We can stop this mess. But you know what? We have to fix it within ourselves first before we can address it within our children and our spouse and then our families. And you know what? We can't always fix it. We can fix what's within us, but we also have to follow what God says, and we have to trust God to take care of that situation in our families. Okay, and I want to talk about one more lady, if y'all don't mind. Do we have enough time? Okay. So my other daughter is named Hadassah. And if y'all don't know, Hadassah's name is the Hebrew name Hadassah's name is Hebrew, which means a myrtle tree. Myrtle trees, I was like, what is a myrtle tree? Well, when I looked it up, a myrtle tree has a pleasant fragrance. It's a tree with a pleasant fragrance. And if you read in Zechariah 1:8, myrtles are symbolized as the righteous. It is referred to in the Bible as a myrtle to the righteous. So I thought that was neat. But actually, Hadassah was Esther's name before it was changed to Esther. So Esther means secret and hidden. And if y'all don't know the story of Esther, it's a great story. It's amazing to read. So let's look at Esther 2:5-7. Who was Esther? Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah, that is Esther, because she didn't have a father or a mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. When her father and mother died, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. So we learn Esther is an orphan. She's obviously pretty, and she's a Jew. Okay, what does that have to do with anything? Well, we will get to that in a minute, but let's talk about her first storm. She was an orphan. Is that not a storm that people face, or our children face? So that's the first storm. And although we don't get to read in the Bible much about that storm, it's still a trial she had to overcome. And being a young woman growing up without your father and your mother, I couldn't imagine. So let's go into the book of Esther. The book of Esther opens up with a 180-day party thrown by the king. And on the 7th day, when the king was feeling good from drinking too much, he summoned his wife Vashti to appear before him to show off her beauty. Vashti refused, making the king furious. So the king consulted his council, who were experts in the law and the justice, and agreed to have her banished. Then we move on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 talks about how sometime later, when the king's rage had calmed down and he wasn't near as drunk, to be honest, Bathsheba, he remembered her, and he thought of all the good she had done for him, and to be honest, he missed her. So the king's council, or attendees, suggested that they find a new queen by having an elaborate beauty contest is what it boils down to. So Esther was taken to the palace and placed under the care of Haggai, who was in charge of all the women. Esther pleased him and gained his favor. Okay, Esther pleased him and gained his favor. She found sight in his eyes. Esther was quiet when she went to the palace about her ethnic background and her and the birthplace where she came from, because Mordecai told her, hey, don't do that. That's why we changed your name. We don't want them to know you are a Jew. So, Esther seeks the advice of Haggai to find out what pleases the king. And of course, he found favor in her, and he was willing to help her and speed things along for her. So let's read Esther 2:17, and we're going to read Esther 2:17 through 20. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won more favor and approval from him than did any other virgins. He placed a royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. The king held a great banquet for all the officials and staff. It was Esther's banquet. He freed his provinces from tax payments and gave gifts worthy of the king's bounty. When the young women were assembled together for a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther still had not revealed her birthplace or ethnic background. As Mordecai had directed, she obeyed Mordecai's orders, as she always had while she was raised by him. She obeyed his orders. Once again, she's still keeping a secret who she is, her background. Okay, a Jew is a storm for her. Being a Jew for her was being a storm, because Jews were not allowed a position of power. So that's a storm right there, knowing that you're not allowed to do that, and here you're doing that right now. You have just been crowned a queen. So we go on and later through the chapter, and we find out that Mordecai frequently visits the kingdom at the gates. And it just so happened he heard two of the king's guards plotting to murder the king. And right now I'm still telling the story. I haven't gotten to my point yet, so I'm sorry. I just want to make sure those who don't know the story of Esther know everything about it. Mordecai tells Esther of the two guys' plots, and the king has them investigated and finds that they are planning to do that and has them hung. And the event was recorded in the court records of daily events in the king's presence. Okay, so then we move on to chapter 3 through 8. This is where Mordecai refuses to bow down to Haman, who was promoted in rank to the highest position than all the other officials. This is where you start seeing the personal conflict that escalates into a nation-wide problem against the Jews. It started with Haman and Mordecai, but it immediately escalates. Haman's anger shifted so much in this chapter that when he learned of Mordecai's ethnic identity, Haman decided to not only destroy Mordecai, he decided to destroy all of his people. So Haman fed the king lie about the Jews being a danger to the kingdom and how they obeyed different laws and were different. The king agreed with Haman to eliminate the Jews, and a date was set for the slaughter and a decree issued to every province. In the midst of this crisis, Mordecai turns to Esther because he believes Esther is the only one who's going to be able to save him and his people. And Mordecai was upset. He was beside himself. But there was a problem. Esther had not been summoned into the royal presence for 30 days. Well, if you do a little background, you can't go into the presence of the king without being summoned. And if you do, it's automatic death. So Haman's like, Esther's like, it's 30 days. I haven't been summoned, which means that it appears that she's lost sight, or that her husband has losing favor in his eyes. She was afraid, oh, I'm losing my husband's favor, and he hasn't summoned me for 30 days, and now you want me to go what? To go before him, not being summoned? Let's look at Esther 4:15. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, "Go and assemble all the Jews who can be found in Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, nights and day. I and my female servants will also fast in the same way. After that, I will go to the king, even if it's against the law. If I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went and did everything Esther had ordered him. So, okay, this is a storm in her life. I don't know about you, but if I knew I was walking to my death or about to walk into my death, I don't know if I'd do it. Esther had a choice to make here. She could either keep her mouth shut and keep her life, save her life, or she could go before the king unsummoned, knowing that she might die. It's a choice. Save ourselves or save our people. She had a choice, and that's a very hard choice. I'd like to say what I would do. I think I know what I would do, but we don't know what we do till we're put in that situation.
That's right.
Now, so Esther goes into the throne room without being summoned, but as soon as the king saw her, she immediately won favor with the king. She requested that they have a banquet, that she had prepared a banquet, and she requested that the king and Haman would come to the banquet that day. While they were drinking, because, that's what got him in trouble in the first place. The king was drinking. That's an issue. We saw in the beginning of the story. Now we're getting toward the middle of the story, or toward the end. He's drinking again at this banquet. And while drinking the wine, the king asked Esther, "Whatever you ask will be given to you. Even half of the kingdom will be done." So Esther requested a second banquet for the next day. King Haman suspected nothing, absolutely nothing. Haman returned home, and as he was leaving, he saw Mordecai, and he got angry again. His anger was so built up, he couldn't even see what was going on around him. He was being blinded by his anger. So Haman orders that to build a gallows to hang Mordecai. That very night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book recording daily events to be brought and read to him. It was in that he was reminded of Mordecai's good deeds. Remember, what did Mordecai do? He saved his life when he told about the men who were plotting against the king to kill him. And the king realized he was never rewarded. Well, don't you think that's a quinky dink he couldn't sleep that night?
Yeah.
Okay, well, but I'll get back to that. So the king asked Haman how he could reward someone who had been a remarkable servant. Well, like I said, Haman, so blinded by his anger, couldn't see who he was talking about. And so Haman, thinking it was him the king was referring to, recommended extravagant rewards. The king agreed, telling Haman that it was Mordecai, which made Haman even more mad. So he was already enraged, but now he is, stay away, he is mad.
Yeah.
So, and even Haman's wife, I just want to point this out, warned him about Mordecai, and he was still full of hate, and he continued to do what he was going to do. At the second banquet, while drinking, the king asked Esther, "Whatever you will be given to you, whatever you seek, even to half the kingdom, it will be done." It is asked a second time. She is asked a second time, "Whatever you want." He was drinking again. So let's read Esther 7:3. I promise I have a point to this. Queen Esther answered, "If I have obtained your approval, my king, and if the king is pleased, spare my life. This is my request, and spare my people. This is my desire. Okay, so here it is. She just asked the king to spare her life. For my people I have been sold out of destruction, death, and extermination. If we had merely been sold as a male and female slaves, I would have kept silent. Indeed, the trouble wouldn't be worth burdening the king. So here it is. She just asked the king. This is life or death for her. She's going to find out what his response is. She's either going to die that night, being hung, or whatever the king had decided. So the king walks off, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, he is thinking what he's going to do to her. But he comes back, and Haman was hanged on the gallows he made for Mordecai. And Mordecai was promoted to Haman's position. Okay, so what's the point of this story? During this story, I never once mentioned the word God in it, did I? No, because God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. Never. So I thought that was interesting. I said, okay, why is God not mentioned in the book of Esther? This is the Bible, is it not? Is it not about God? So as I was researching it, when you read with understanding, God is actually the main character of the story. You cannot see God working in these storms and these trials, but He is there. He is directing the path. You think it was quinkety? The king couldn't sleep that night? Do you think it was quinkety? Mordecai told Esther not to reveal her background. God was planning to save the Jews all along, and He used Esther. He orchestrated this beautiful story and all these events that took place to do one thing: to save His people.
Amen.
So, God orchestrates stories throughout. I think my life is, I consider my life like the story of Esther, although I didn't have the prettiness or I wasn't beautiful like her, or God didn't make me queen. But God orchestrated my life. He brought me from one area where I grew up. I came out of abuse when I was a child. And to be honest, if y'all have ever been through abuse, you understand that you carry that with you forever. You just have to learn how to handle it and how to move on from it. You can either let it tear you down, or you can learn to use it for good. And so I have to admit, I went into my college years, I went to a private Christian college, and I let that abuse carry with me. And to be quite honestly, I thought I had handled the situation, but when I met up with Hannah's father, I realized I'm still struggling on. I'm still struggling with this abuse, because this abuse has tore me down. I feel unworthy. I don't feel like I can do any better than this. This is it. This is the best it will get for me. But I had to learn. I had to learn to take that and move on. So I started the first steps of, I moved back home. I was living in Houston at the time, and I had to move back home. And in that relationship, and to be honest, that relationship was, God intervened in it. He intervened we are still, I wouldn't say friends, but Hannah's father and I can get along, and we're good. We can talk to each other civil. He felt like he needed to sign up his rights, which I was fine with, because later in life, I knew one day that would be good for our daughter, because our daughter didn't need to be involved in lives that were, to be honest, crumbling right before our eyes. Our daughter needed a stable home, and I knew that. And in the process of that pregnancy, I had to make some very hard decisions, very, very hard decisions, whether I was going to keep that child, whether I was going to give that child up for adoption, because I wasn't married then. And at the time, I was told I was pregnant with triplets, and early on in the pregnancy, I ran into those complications, and actually, we were going along in the pregnancy, and the heartbeats weren't showing up on the children. So the day I actually went in to have a DNC, I requested to have another sonogram, just one more sonogram, to make sure. And there, the nurse, not the doctor, the nurse found a heartbeat. The doctor didn't see a heartbeat, but the nurse saw a faint heartbeat. So we went from there. We're like, okay, am I going to keep these children? I mean, and to be honest, although at the time I did not want a child, I thought, could I kill this child? Could I really kill this thing? And at the time, you were like, what do I do? And a lady came into my life, and she had worked at a crisis pregnancy center. She was not working at a crisis pregnancy center at that time. She was my coworker, and she walked me through the stages. First, we had to do the dreadable thing of telling my parents. I was not looking forward to it, and here I had not lived at home since I had turned 18, and I was about to have to confess my sin, either stay where I was at and live in sin, or come back home and get my life together. And so I chose to come back home, and it was an adjustment. I came back home and I got my life on straight. I got connected into a church, and that is actually where I met my husband. But the funny story about meeting my husband is when I met him, I did not like him, did not care for him, wanted nothing to do with him. And to be quite honest with you, I thought I had feelings for his brother, which is a little odd. So his family would invite me over, and I'm like, oh, well, this guy's cute, you know, let's just. So as I got to know his family, and as I got to know his brother, I realized this wasn't the situation for me. This wasn't the guy I was supposed to be with. But all along, the other brother, which has happened to be my husband, Travis, was pursuing me, and I never knew it. He had stepped in areas of my life that to be honest, it was a year into our marriage before I had found out some things he had done for me. Why I was a single mother. And mind you, I was a single mother living by myself for a while. I was barely making ends meet. I was working I didn't have a teaching job at that time. I was working as a long-term sub. And here this guy decided to step in ways that he didn't have to, and that he never told me about. He paid for daycare one time. Didn't have a clue who paid for it. I thought someone else had paid for it. There was times I needed medicine, and somehow it worked out. He paid for it. Never knew. Would never say anything. And as I got to know him, I thought, wow, this man has a good heart. You know, he loves my daughter. And as I get to know my husband, he starts putting together the pieces of me. Here I was, not worthy of him, today I still don't feel worthy of him, because he is such an amazing man, and he has taken me and slowly put me back together. He tells me daily he loves me. He tells me daily I'm beautiful. He finds the places where I'm weak and builds me up. He encourages me to do the right thing at all times. He encourages me to get in the Word of God and do what is right. Now, I want to make sure I make this clear. You have to get right with God before you can get. You have to find your love in God. You cannot find your love in a man. And so Travis was over here the whole time, walking with me, helping me grow in the Word. And little did I know, he would end up being my lifesaver. He ended up taking me in and helping me in ways that, to be honest, I would have never been able to make it. And I think of the story of Esther, God just having those places. I had my daughter. There was consequences with that, my actions, my poor decisions. But he also used that situation to bless me. And I would have never met my husband if it wasn't for my daughter. Because my daughter helped me turn my life around. My daughter helped me to start pushing me to be a better mom. Because when you start having a child, you think, oh, well, I don't want my child growing up that way. I don't want my child thinking this way. I better get my act together, because I don't want her to be nothing like me. I mean, it's true. I will tell you, I do not want my child like me. I want her to be better. Amen. I don't want her to struggle with the areas I've had to struggle with. I don't want that bondage of abuse to pass down from generation, because it has. If you look back at my history, that abuse has been there. We just don't admit to it, and we don't stop it. So I want my child to have a better life. So my husband and I married, and I could tell you so many events leading up to him. And we married, and we thought, to be honest, I really thought we had a good marriage, and he did too. We had some situations, and I'm going to call them bondages within the family that we were trying to break with our bondage. We were trying to break in our family. Travis and I both came from different backgrounds, different ways of being raised. But with that, we both had our own set of bondage. And it wasn't until in August, 1 year from now, we knew we had issues in our marriage, but nothing big. But we realized in August, he was in an accident. He was burned. He received 2nd and 3rd degree burns to his hands, his arms, and his legs at work, along with 5 other men at the coal mine in Sulphur Springs. And boy, you don't realize how you love someone until you realize that their life could have been easily taken that day. I spent a while with him in Parkland at the hospital, and he was released to come home. And it wasn't until he came home that we realized we truly loved each other. And we knew we loved each other. But through that process, I had to attend to Travis's needs in ways I never thought I would have to anyone. I had to take care of him. I had to bathe him. I had to change his bandages. It really humbled me, and I think it humbled Travis as well, to see that I was willing to do that for him, and that I was willing to do whatever it took. But during that time of the healing process, we've had to deal with family on both sides. You know, when there's a tragedy, family likes to step in, and you know, and we realized some of that bondage we had been trying to break before the accident was still there. But we weren't going to ever do anything about it, to be honest. We were kind of just addressing it at times, but we just sat there. We let it continue. Maybe we were trying to keep the peace. Maybe we were just trying to stay out of it. But that bondage was in our family. It was in my daughter, my 2 daughters, my husband, and me. We were fighting that bondage. How do we get rid of it? Well, we had to start addressing it. And after that accident, we realized that, you know what? This is a problem. We know we love each other, and we know we're willing to do whatever it takes to keep our marriage alive, but we have an issue. We have an issue that we knew we had, but we didn't realize how severe it was. God uses those situations that we have, the storms, the trials that we have to go through, to work it out through us. I had to go through that stage of being a single mom. I had to. That was a trial that I guarantee you, God is the only creator of life. And I know God gave me that baby. That baby was conceived in poor choices and a mistake for my behalf, but that child was not a mistake because God created that child. So that child goes on to help, God uses that child to help me to grow, to build. And then from there, having that child, I was able to meet my husband that I would have never met. And I know I keep going back, but I just want to make sure I emphasize this. So God's hand was in that. So then I met my husband. We're rocking along. We're doing good for a couple years. And yes, we had our little issues. But then we had to go through a major storm to realize we're not handling these situations the way we're supposed to. Let's get our act together. Let's break this bondage, and let's move on. It's like the story of Esther. Although we don't see God, we may not feel God, we may not see God in the situation, He's there. And sometimes that storm has to come from God. And then sometimes it's from the devil, and God uses it for good. If you will seek Him. You know, the devil doesn't have to win in these situations. I don't know why we think we have to let him. And if we will stop dwelling on the problems and look at the reason. What's the reason? Is it God working in me in my faith? Is it God working in me because my actions? Or is it God working in me because the devil's just trying to cause a problem, and God's just saying, I'll be right here. I'm going to walk you through this. James 1:2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whatever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete and lacking nothing. To be honest, if I had to go through these trials again, bring it on. Because the older I'm getting and the more mistakes I'm making and having to learn from it, I'm realizing those mistakes are causing me to grow. They are causing me to be a better wife, a better mother, a better person, a better teacher. I hate to say this, but I don't regret my mistakes because I'm learning and God is using those to help me. And if you don't learn from those mistakes, what's the point of going through them? Because you're not learning. History repeats itself. You're going to have to go through it again. So learn it the first time. Amen. God walks by our side, encouraging us through the nature. Encouraging us to mature us in faith. He does not give us more than we can bear, and we see that in 1 Corinthians 10:13. So how to win? You put on the spiritual armor of God, and you can read that in Ephesians 6:12 through 14. For time's sake, I'll stop. But put on the armor of God. That's your way to win. Go to God. Don't go to your friend. Don't go to your sister.